Okay. All right. In essence, a crisis is something that affects the organization or has the potential to affect your organization. A crisis may not necessarily be bad for you because sometimes the crisis can result in you improving the systems in your company or improving your relationship with your stakeholders or with the media. So crises sometimes deliver lessons of how to improve. Yeah. And what happens is crisis management makes a situation worse. I don't know if any of you remember Watergate. It caused the president of the US, Richard Nixon, to be booted out from office because it was something that they allowed it to fester and get worse. So this is what I mean by crisis management is good, because then you will be able to handle whatever crisis on hand and then make things better for yourself or for your company. There are 6 stages of crisis management. The first stage is avoiding a crisis. There are many ways of doing this. I'll share with you in a minute. The second stage is preparing to manage the crisis. And once you prepare to manage the crisis, you will have to distinguish the crisis, and when the crisis happens, containing it, resolving it, and then profiting from it. Now, first stage, I would like to suggest prevention as being better than cure. Also because this is the least costly stage and it is the simplest to control in the event of a potential crisis. How do you do this? You need to conduct a vulnerability test for your organization, and in my opinion, a vulnerability test is the most important tool to have when you're looking at managing a crisis. So there are various things that you can do to do this test. If you'd like to know a little bit more, we can do this at the end of this presentation. I can't give you in detail, but I can just take you through what you need to do. The second way of avoiding a crisis is to continually scan the environment for issues, be it in the media or within your organization while you're doing your internal communication, while you're having an engagement with your stakeholders. So you need to be really sensitive, pick up warning signs of a situation that may lead to a crisis. So scanning the environment for issues is important. There is even a discipline in the PR context, which is called issues management. And there are companies that have dedicated departments that do this on an ongoing basis, especially companies that are very prone to crisis. So if you are not in a position to have the luxury of an issues management department, perhaps you can dedicate someone within your communication department to be tracking and scanning the environment for issues. Issues management is important because I call it a precursor to a crisis. It helps to detect brewing situations that can explode into a crisis. Stage 2, preparing to manage a crisis. This is training the key personnel, having a crisis team, making plans for dealing with crisis. So you need to put a crisis management plan in place. And within this also, you need to have a crisis communication plan in place. I'll tell you in a while why crisis communication is a key aspect of crisis management. You also have to have contingency plans, crisis simulation, emergency drills. I would suggest companies do this once a year, but ideally twice a year, so that you are well prepared in the event of a crisis. And you also have to look at your stakeholder relationships management, make sure that this is being attended to diligently. So you have to work with people from customer relations, people who are in other departments that have a direct stakeholder relationship, as this would help you to manage the relationships or advise them on how to manage the relationships. Stage 3, you need to distinguish the crisis. This is the most challenging stage. You need to understand it is not just about technical aspects, although the people from the other departments, they would be more keen on the technical aspects. My recommendation is you also have to look at perception. What is your publics out there saying about you and how you are handling the crisis? So be sensitive to the outcomes, how people are looking at you, because this will directly impact on your company's reputation. You can claim that you are the greatest company on earth, but if you do not manage your crisis well, if you do not come across as a caring company, if you do not come across as being able to handle your stakeholder relationships well, this will have a huge impact on your reputation, and also on the relationships that you have with your other constituents, like your regulators, the media, and so on. If they are not being treated well, when you need them the most, it's going to cause problems in your relationship. So be very mindful about perception. So you need to win the struggle between perception and reality. Of course, they say perception is reality, yes, but public misperception can cause a crisis. So what information you put out there concerning your crisis, concerning your company, and the way you handle it is going to lead to public perception and people talk and word of mouth. And of course, nowadays you have social media 24/7. No amount of corporate advertisements or corporate denials is going to help you if the public has already formed a perception about your company. So this is also a very important area that you need to be mindful of. The fourth stage is containing the crisis. You need to stop the bleeding fast. So tough decisions have to be made. Usually it is the CEO who is the head of the crisis task force. So if the CEO is not available for reasons known only to him or her, you need to have a very capable number 2 and number 3 who is very well versed with the crisis management process and is already media trained to speak to the media, and is also able to give the right information very quickly. So this goes to my next point about credibility. Now, you need to appear very credible. I know the lawyers will be very concerned about, being sued and so on, but credibility is far more important than legal positioning. If you try to spin it, or if you try to do legal speak about it and you're not being truthful, it comes across very clearly. So that's going to impact your reputation as well. So remember that credibility is far more important than legal positioning. You need to train your spokesperson to speak to the media and to key stakeholders. Yeah, and this media training has got to be revisited as much as you revisit your crisis simulation programs. because when the crisis hits, people usually forget what they have to do, and then they go into the mode of panic. And on TV, that comes across very clearly. I need to share with you a little bit. I don't know if anyone remembers the BP Deepwater crisis in the US. The CEO, Tony Hayward, came on TV not very positively, because when he was questioned about how the crisis is coming along, he said something along the lines of, I want my life back. And with sound bites, that was the statement that was captured by the media, and within seconds, that went viral. So Tony Hayward came across as someone who is selfish. He just wants his life back, very unbecoming of a CEO. But studies have been done on this about Tony Hayward's response. I believe that he reacted that way because he was overtired and he had been through a lot, and the media caught him at the wrong time. So my recommendation is to have several spokespersons so that one single person is not tired out and having to face the media. A crisis is not the time to try to be a hero. It is a team effort. So everyone has got to put in and work together to address the crisis. Resolving the crisis, you need to be fast. You need to communicate accurate information immediately. Don't wait to go through your normal hierarchical processes, wait for one department head to approve before the next department head approves. In a crisis, you do not have that luxury. Communication has to be put out there, but make sure it is accurate. So put it out there quickly, because you don't want the crisis to fester. When you're not saying anything, rumors start to spread. And in this age of technology, it spreads very, very fast. Within seconds, it's out there. Once it's out there, it's very difficult for you to retract. So this is why I'm saying communicate accurate information immediately, even if it is a one-liner to inform the public about what's going on and what you're doing about it, because that will put you as someone who is in complete control of the crisis. The final stage, stage 6, is profiting from the crisis. I'm not trying to suggest that we are all profiteering from it, but what I'm saying is a crisis will give you the opportunity to repair the disruptions within your organization or within your systems. You can turn an emotionally charged situation into a positive one. So again, this is why you need to be on the ball, putting information out there, showing that you are sympathetic to the situation, that you've got everything under control, and you know what you're doing. So profiting from the crisis is about working to regain the trust of your stakeholders. I'd like to share with you a best practice model that I've been using. It's not very new. I adapted this from Mitrov's book that was published in the year 2000. You need to identify or being able to distinguish, like I said earlier, the types of crisis. Is it economic? Is it informational? Is it physical, loss of productivity? Is it human resource? Is it reputational? Is it psychopathic acts? Like we had that Tylenol case where someone tried to poison the pills. So that's psychopathic. And then, of course, natural disasters. Natural disasters means you have to approach it in a completely different way from if it was an economic crisis or an informational crisis or a physical crisis. Major crises happen because companies are usually unaware of what's happening to them, or they are not ready to face the crisis. They do not anticipate, which means they do not track their vulnerability. So I would say crises can be avoided, but you just have to be a little bit more aware and be ready to face the crisis. Mechanisms that you do this, signal detection. All crises send out a trail of early warning signs. Even natural disasters, you know, like in the case of landslides and so on, you usually get cracks, you know, heavy rains and so on and so forth. So it doesn't just happen immediately. They are usually signal detection. So you can be sensitive to that depending on which industry you come from. Environment scanning, as I said earlier, is essential. If you don't have a system in place, I would really urge you to consider putting that system in place because it will be so useful in the long run. Bit more work for the corporate comm department, but it is work that you really need to do. I realize that many corporate communication or whatever you call yourselves, corporate affairs, PR department and so on, are usually very understaffed, and especially now with the way the economy is going. But please try to persuade the powers that be in your organization. This is something that you really need to do, and you need to qualify the reasons why. So please pay very serious attention to doing this in order to avoid a very expensive crisis which you need to handle. Yeah? Damage containment is also a very important aspect of crisis management. There are many ways that you can do this. I don't have the time to go through it in detail, but if you want to know, I may be able to share at the end of this presentation. Yeah? And then there's the post-crisis learning. Accordingly, the Chinese character of crisis is opportunity and disaster. So crisis can result in you improving your systems, finding out what's wrong with the way you're doing things and improving on that, finding out areas where things are not working so you can redesign your systems in order to avoid future crisis management. Now, I'd like to share with you a model of systems which I believe is worthwhile looking into when you're, whether you're addressing a crisis or whether you're addressing communication in your organization. At the heart, I use an onion model for a reason, because when you start peeling an onion, you get to the heart of the onion. Now, first of all, it's technology, because it's so ubiquitous. It's prevalent everywhere in the organization. The second peel is the organizational structure. So we need to put systems in place to be crisis ready. Yeah. And ideally, it would be good to have a participant from each major department to be part of your crisis team, but it doesn't have to be so. You need to get people who can work well under extreme stress, yeah? And then there's the human factor. So of course, yeah, people who are good communicators, people who don't crack under pressure is also essential. And then there's this organizational culture. Is your company a company that is kind to its employees, or is good to customers, that sort of thing? So these are crisis management elements. But most important of all, number 5, which is at the heart of the onion, is your top management mindset. There are many leaders who believe that a crisis would not happen to them. I'm saying this from experience because I've had situations where I've recommended crisis management elements to be put into companies, and they say, oh, no, this doesn't happen to us. We don't have crisis. We will not have crisis. However, in Malaysia, just to share with you, after the Malaysian Airlines 370 that went missing in flight on its way to Beijing, and then the crisis that happened after that, Malaysian companies are now being more aware about the need to do good crisis management, the need to train their spokesperson and so on. So that's what I mean by, you benefit from a crisis. Very expensive cost to pay, but still, at least there's some positive outcomes that came out of that crisis. A little bit more about top management mindset. It would help if the corporate communicator is part of the dominant coalition, so you're part of the decision-making process, and you will be able to advise the CEO on the requirements. But if you are just a department within a department within a department, the challenge is overwhelming. Trying to persuade your management to be very mindful about addressing crisis and crisis communication and so on. So I would say try, as much as possible to persuade your management to do this, because it is not something that you can say you can do without. It is very, very vital that you look into this. Defense mechanisms. Like I said earlier, CEOs. So the first thing is denial. Crises don't happen to us. And then there's disavowal, which is the impact of the crisis on us is very small, And then there's the idealization element. We are a very good organization. Crises don't happen to us. Well, I've got news for people who say that. And then there's this, what I call hubris, board of directors or CEOs who claim that they are too big to fail. There's no such thing. Whether you are big or small, you can be hit by a crisis, and the crisis can hit you hard. Look at BP. Look at Enron. Look at Arthur Andersen, to name a few. Like even our back in Malaysia, our Malaysian Airlines caused the company to lose business, and then there's this huge trust deficit. It has taken them years to try to win over customers that Malaysian Airlines is as good, if not better, than they were before. I need to understand they are better now because they've realized where they have gone wrong. I hope it's true. projection, and then there's this thing about this blame mentality, you know, someone's out to get us, so, but not looking within themselves, but trying to put the blame on others. That's why they had a crisis. And then there's this thing about we don't have to worry about it, these things don't happen to us, and then being very complacent about it until the crisis hits them. And then there's compartmentalization, where they believe the crisis does not affect the entire organization because all the parts in the organization are independent. No, because when the crisis hits you, like I said earlier, perception. So the perception that goes into people's head is the company and its brand. They're not going to look at the different parts within the organization. It's all company A or company B. So be mindful of these defense mechanisms and try to work around it. Stakeholders. You need to build relationships with stakeholders. You need to understand how they can work with you in the event of a crisis, and then getting them on board to work with you to address the crisis. So be it regulators, be it the media, be it some of your customers even, you need to get them on board to work with you in the event of a crisis. And you need to develop capabilities to respond to the crisis. And this is where, like I said earlier, it's a team effort. So nobody is going to be a hero, because everybody has to put in his or her bit to address the crisis and then to start rebuilding from the ashes. Yeah. Scenarios, very important. I cannot say often enough. This is the glue that binds all the factors. So you need to think of the unthinkable. Best case scenario, worst case scenario, go through it, drill down, think of all the different scenarios that can happen to your organization, and then design crisis management and crisis communication for each different scenarios, because when the crisis happens, you will not have time to start thinking of, from step 1 I go to step 2. No. So if you have the scenarios in place and you have done either simulations or drills, then you will be better prepared to face when the real crisis happens. So I cannot recommend you often enough. Please think seriously about the scenarios, because a good scenario will break down the most taken for granted system that you have in place, and then coming up with ways and means to address it in the event that a crisis hits you. Oh, sorry, I hit the button. While designing your scenarios, you also need to include a chain reaction of crises happening all at the same time. So yes, as I said earlier, you need to do scenarios for each department or each event that you think may happen to your company, but also prepare yourselves for a chain reaction of crises happening all at the same time, so that you will be well armed to address the crisis. Crisis communication. As I said earlier, a key aspect of crisis management, one does not exist without the other, so they coexist, where crisis management deals with managing the reality. Crisis communication deals with influencing perception of your key stakeholders. Perception of crisis contributes to crisis outcomes. When people see you as unable to manage your crisis or unable to manage the people, when a crisis hits your organization, no amount, as I said earlier, no amount of advertisement or putting on your website that you are the greatest company on earth, that you are the most wonderful company on earth, because people believe what they see of what happens to them. So people will always remember how you treat them. So it is very important for you to look into this and to consider the kind of perception that you will be put across in the event of a crisis, because a positive perception in times of crisis will help you to get out of the crisis earlier and in a better situation. But a negative perception, people will think badly of you, they will not want to deal with you, they may not buy your products, and they may not believe what you say about your company or your products. So be mindful of the communication that you put across in the times of crisis. You need to look at crisis communication strategies, make that part of your crisis management plan, and look at the kind of messages that you put across as well, because these messages can make or break your company in times of crisis. Sometimes it's the way the CEO conducts himself during the news conferences, or the way the crisis task force behave at the site, on site of crisis, how you treat people, how you treat the victims. Everything will be put under a microscope. So be mindful of this. When you communicate effectively in a crisis, you need to know who are your key constituents. Who are you talking to? Would you be using mainstream or social media or both? Would you be posting videos on YouTube to give updates on the progress of your crisis management? You need to monitor all media sites to detect attacks. Usually the attacks would come post-crisis, because once people have seen how you behave or mismanage your crisis, and then they start attacking your company. So you need to track this and address the attacks as they come. You also need to ask yourself, are your spokespersons media trained? If they are not, please start considering that now. And this media training has got to be regularly revisited so that they understand what they need to say and how they need to say it. You also have to identify the people who will be speaking to your constituents. So get people from your company who understand the situation very, very well and understand the effects of not communicating well, so that what they say, using the key messages that you have crafted, and everyone has got to be singing from the same song sheet. Yeah, you cannot have someone from marketing saying something else, and someone from production saying something else, and someone on site saying something else. Everybody has got to sing from the same song sheet. So everyone in the crisis task force will have to be trained on what to say, how to say. They will have their guidelines and also all the key messages that they have to use. Now, the other factor that many people don't consider is the government's support. So when a crisis hits you, you need to have the regulators on your side. So be mindful of how you establish relationship with your regulators and how you engage with them. Messages, I would recommend not more than 4 key messages, but think seriously about what you're going to put in your key messages. These key messages should not steer too far away from your corporate key messages, yeah? They have to be in sync. Now, your key messages have to be specific. Please do not use jargon because the public doesn't understand your jargon. So stay away from using jargon. Be honest. Support with evidence and solid facts. Don't start creating new information which you are not sure. So that's why I say everybody has got to be singing from the same song sheet. Have regular meetings. One word of advice, please do not conduct a news conference unless you have some new information to give. Like in the case of the Malaysian Airlines 370, the government conducted news conferences every hour for the first, if I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3 days, but they had no new information. So after a while, the journalists, many of them are from international news owners, they got a bit frustrated because calling them for news conferences but no new information. So I would suggest, unless you have new information, accurate information, do not call for a news conference, but by all means put out news releases or press statements or holding statements. That way they know that information is forthcoming and that you are willing to share with them. Yeah. When you're giving information about a situation, give examples that people can relate to. Also, be aware of your takeaway message. Yeah, when you are sharing information with people, ask yourself, what are they taking away from this information that I'm giving them? So be mindful of that. Yeah. Key messages made early and often will influence the perception of your crisis. So, as I say, I can't say often enough, pay serious attention to your key messages. When communicating bad news, be calm, be honest, be succinct, be factual. I'd like to share with you a technique that you can use. It's called the sandwich technique. This is to soften the blow of the crisis. First of all, you give a positive statement about the progress, and then you deliver the bad news. And then you cushion it with another positive statement and what you are going to do going forward. So in this way, the bad news is not going to be too bad. Say sorry. I know the lawyers are going to tell you, don't say anything, don't apologize, because they are worried that you may be sued. But companies need to show compassion. Yeah, this is a crisis is not the time of thinking about whether you're going to be sued, because the crisis will have victims will have families, you know. So show compassion. Present to the public that you are not a heartless corporate entity, or you are just thinking of your life, like in the way that Tony Hayward did, because when you are head of an organization, you need to show that you care. And this has got to be so significant during a crisis, to show that you care. Now, like I said here, don't listen to the lawyers. I'm not saying that you don't listen to them at all, but there are many ways of expressing regret without committing yourself to something that you will be sued later on. So convey compassion without suggesting that you're guilty. So that's all I have to say, Lisa. I'd like to take questions now, if there are any.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of questions that have come in, so I'll let you go ahead, Aisha, and view those, unless you want me to read them out to you.
Yeah. The first question that I have here is, what if there aren't any signal detection and a crisis has happened? My answer to that would be, just be prepared for any crisis. Even though you don't have signal detection, like I said, look at the scenarios, be prepared with your scenarios, and put the solutions that you anticipate in place. I hope that answers your question. The next question is, I know you said that you need to respond immediately when a crisis has happened. If you don't have much or any details, what do you say? That you're looking into it. Okay. This is why I'm saying, as I said earlier, it would be useful if the communicators is part of the task force and is actively participating in the task force, because you should already have your response in place. So again, we go back to scenarios, we go back to preparation, and then you have the answers already there for you to pick it up and use it. Saying that you are looking into it does not paint a very positive picture of you. It shows that you are not ready, and then you are using this as a delaying tactic. So do not say that you're looking into it. Think of how you can prepare something convincing without giving too many details, if you are unable to give any details. But don't go into the mode of not giving any details at all, or saying no comment and so on. Please do not do that, because the media will see you as not trying to avoid. Then what happens when this happens, when you say no comment? They try to go to other people in your organization to get information. And that person may not be the right person to speak to. They may not give the right information, and the effect will be disastrous, because that person may not be giving the right answer. I hope that helps. Another question, could you please talk about the vulnerability assessment? Okay. Vulnerability assessment is something that you prepare yourself. Yeah, it's a checklist. You need to identify what are the dangers or flaws in your organization that could lead to a crisis. So you need to do a checklist. Again, going back to scenarios. You need to find out how likely are you to have a crisis. So go back, look at all the different departments, what can happen, and so on, and come up with a checklist of how vulnerable you are. You can even grade it like a Likert scale from 1 to 5. You know, how vulnerable are you? Do a checklist, distribute it to all the departments, and then come up and evaluate and come up with an analysis of how vulnerable you are. Work with risk management if you have a risk management department, and then come up with a checklist of how vulnerable you are, and then you will know, are we ready in case a crisis happens. Helen says, I find it is difficult to know the boundaries between CM and CC. What involvement do we as communication have in the crisis management? My answer is you have to be very, very involved, because everything about the management of the crisis involves communication. Yeah. When the crisis hits you, you have to communicate, you have to put out a press statement, you have to talk to the media. So there are no boundaries, as it were. Like I say, it is a part of crisis management. Crisis communication is a part of crisis management. So you need to convince your management, your CEO and so on, that you will need to sit at the table when you are talking about scenarios, how you address the crisis, how do we communicate the crisis, how do we come up with the crisis management plan. So the communicator plays a very active role. This is why the title of my presentation, it is a high level ability. I hope that answers your question. Jessica asks, if we really have nothing further to share, what else can we say besides no comments? Jessica, you can keep repeating the progress of how you are addressing the crisis. It's not wrong. You can keep putting out updates of the progress. There's no such thing as nothing further to say, because you need to share updates and what you're doing about it. So I know companies don't want to share. I know management who don't want people to know what they're doing about it. But the public needs to know, because the crisis impacts them. I hope that answers your question. Jessica again. Should the public relations person be a spokesperson in the event that all other? No. And I'm very emphatic about it. The public relations person should not be the spokesperson. The public relations person should be the one that is managing the communication that goes out there. You are not to be the spokesperson. Plus, you will have so much on your hands, you will not be a very cool, calm, and collected spokesperson. And if you go on television, that comes across very, very clearly that you are panicking. So PR people should not be spokesperson. Like I said earlier, train all the senior management on crisis management so that they can be ready to be spokesperson at any time, not waiting for the CEO alone. So this goes into your crisis management plan as well. Who are the designated spokesperson? Very rarely that not everyone is available. However, I could be wrong, but my recommendation is PR people should not be spokesperson. Elaine, thank you very much. Thank you, Helene. Jessica has another question. Should business continuity process start as soon as a crisis is detected? I would say you should have your business continuity process ongoing, not wait for a crisis. It should be ongoing. However, I could be wrong, but be prepared to go on business. It will not be business as usual, but be mindful of what's going on. But you cannot just close down business, because the effect would be huge, because there are other people and other departments and other customers and so on. So don't wait for a crisis to be detected. Yeah, thank you.
Aisha, I have received another question as well that I'm not sure if you've seen, and it's about how do you see crisis management fitting in with the company sustainability reporting and with sustainability in general? Would you have time to quickly cover that as well, please?
Sure, but let me just answer these two other questions. Sandy says, should the business continuity plan sit as part of a crisis communication plan? Yes, certainly. Yes, Sandy. Okay. Yeah, I can talk a little bit. So, what's the question again? Sorry,
No, that's
Lisa?
okay. It's just about how you see crisis management fitting in with company sustainability reporting and with sustainability in general.
Yes, I believe it is a very integral part of sustainability, because for the company to be sustainable, you have to show that you have system in place for the company to go on business and doing it well. When you don't have crisis communication and crisis management, how do you show that you are sustainable? So I would say it's an integral part of your sustainability plan. But of course, this is my personal opinion. I don't know if there are any academic findings out there. I can't share that with you.
Thank you.
There are some more questions. Oh, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Helene has something. She says, ignorant here, what are they referring to in terms of business continuity? The crisis needs to attention, of course, but the business needs, when relevant, continue. Yeah, the business, like I said, the business has to continue, but you have to be mindful about what's going on around you. Yeah, and be prepared to have all the answers when questioned about the crisis or what is the situation of the crisis. Customers might be asking, your suppliers might be asking, so you need to be ready with all the answers. I hope that answers your question.
Well, thank you very much, Aisha. That was very valuable information. There doesn't appear to be any more questions coming through, but certainly if any come up, we'll endeavour to get responses back to you.
Sure.
I will be sending a recording of this presentation out, as well as seeking your feedback. We're very keen to get feedback on the webinars, but also to get some ideas from you on topics that you would like to see in future webinars, or even presenters that you'd like to see present. So I'll be asking that question in the survey that comes through to you.
Okay.
So yes, please just watch out for that email later today and respond. Now, Aisha, there is one other question that's come in, and we've got 3 minutes, so maybe you've got time to quickly address that as well before we finish up.
It's from Malar. She says about this new majority shareholder from China. They have made some comments that created concerns over there in Malaysia in terms of reporting. Can we position ourselves as a standalone, i.e. country-based entity versus a dual country entity? Malar, this may take time for me to answer. Could I take it up with you separately? Is that okay? Because this may take some time, because it's a strategy question, Malar. I hope that's okay.
That would be great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Aisha. That was fantastic to have your insights today and share that information. And it's something that I know that I certainly often think about, getting more prepared for a crisis. So I'm motivated now to make sure that I put plans in place at my company as well to ensure that we have everything ready and in place. Although we do, as an international company, do quite a bit to have plans in place, but it's always good to revisit that. So thank you everyone for your time. I'm Lisa McNally.
Can I say something in closing, Lisa?
Yeah, sure. Yes.
I just want to say this, as communicators, we need to be prepared for any crisis. There's no such thing as it doesn't happen to us, or our company has not gone through a crisis. You just need to be well prepared. So if you can convince your senior management and even the board of directors, who also need to know about crisis management and why they need to do it. So you've got your work cut out for you to start being prepared for a crisis. I wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Aisha. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.